Hey there, and welcome to the Catching Up with Casey show, where we talk about anything and everything that has to do with building cohesive, vision-driven teams. I am Casey Watts, school impact strategist and the host of this show. Now, if you are here, then you inevitably are an instructional leader who wants to make change happen, even when change seems impossible. And you can do that if you have cohesive, vision-driven teams that have done clarity work. They know exactly where they're headed and how they're going to get there. These teams have done identity work, and they've built their self and social awareness skills. And they have done collaboration work, and they know how to move beyond faux collaboration to get to true collaboration where change happens and where people get on board. I'm so excited to bring to you conversations that help you to do exactly that. The work that needs to be done to build cohesive, vision-driven teams. Now, with all of that said, let's dive into today's conversation. Well, hey, everybody. Welcome to episode 92 of the Catching Up with Casey show. I'm super excited that you guys are here. I've got a great episode for you tonight. I'm joined by Todd Nesloney, and he's going to introduce himself here in just a little bit. But I do have to pause for just a second and recognize that it is Veterans Day. And so I just want to give a huge shout out. Thank you to all of those who have served our country for our benefit and to keep us safe and thriving. And so, yeah, I just want to pause there and give a shout out to you guys who are veterans. And also, guys, I would love for you to write a review for this show. It is how this show gets out to more people. And I am so excited about getting these messages out to a wider audience because I have so many great guests that come on who share wonderful messages that more leaders need to hear. So with that said, I have a great guest tonight. Todd, I'm going to let you introduce yourself. Welcome to the show.
Well, hello, Casey. Hello, everybody. My name is Todd Nesloney. I am the Director of Culture and Strategic Leadership at the Texas Elementary Principals and Supervisors Association. I'm also a consultant and a speaker. I'm an author. I'm a father. I'm a husband. And I say yes to far too many things, clearly, but just a lot going on.
Yeah, that's awesome. So tell us a little bit about the books that you've written.
Yeah, so, we were talking a little bit before this about kind of my view of what I would be one day in life. And it's so funny because every single thing I'm doing right now was never on a vision board of mine, was never in my line of sight. When it comes to being an author specifically, I loved writing. Like, I would write all the time, but I never felt like I would ever be comfortable sharing my ideas or sharing those kind of things. And my good friend, Dave Burgess, who is an author and a publisher as well, he kept pressuring me. You need to write. You're doing so many good things. And I was like, no, I don't even know where to begin. Like, it's so overwhelming. And he just pressured me enough until one day I was like, you know what? I met this friend at this conference. We did some writing together. We hit it off. We've got some good ideas that we wanted to I'll try to write something. And that's where my first book, Kids Deserve It, was born, was at a principal conference in San Diego, California. And that has been still my most successful book. And I've written 6 others since then. And it has been, God, that's so weird to say out loud. But it's been such an exciting adventure. People are always like, well, what's the next book? And I'm like, I don't know. Like, I feel like I put everything out there right now. Like, there's not another book on the horizon. I'm just fully invested in what I've already put out.
Yeah, that's amazing. You know what is so interesting is the hashtag Kids Deserve It is extremely popular.
Yes.
And I have used it multiple times before myself because my consulting started with teachers, like really focused on things inside the class, like instruction in the classroom. And of course, over time, it's blossomed to like consulting with leadership and teams and building cohesive vision driven teams, obviously, because that's what the show is about. But still, I think it's appropriate to use the hashtag kids deserve it when we're focused on leadership.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more, and it's so funny how that even came about because I remember my co-author and I, Adam Welcome, we were just talking, and we were talking about just excuses we find ourselves making, or excuses we find or we hear from others, and somehow the words were just like, well, the kids deserve that. That's why we do that. We were like, wait, that's something. Like, I like that. Like, that's a good excuse eliminator,
Yeah.
is because the kids deserve it. And we get the question all the time, like, what do kids deserve, from all kinds of people? And, it's such a wide open question. And it really just depends on what you're doing in the work. And I feel like what I thought I meant by that phrase when I first started writing the book has shifted over the years,
Mm.
because now I'm very cognizant to say we do things because that's what we do, what's best for kids because that's what kids deserve, but not at the detriment of adults.
Yeah.
Like, it's not just meaning like let's give kids everything,
Yeah.
because if anybody on here is a parent or works with kids, that's never a great way to raise children into powerful adults. And so, but I think it's so funny how that came up and how many people used it and how it took off, and the great support system that we have around that messaging in that book. And it's mind-boggling to me.
Yeah. Yeah. And that book, actually, there is now a book called Teachers Deserve It, right?
Mhm.
That Ray and Adam
Uh-huh.
co-authored. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Both of the books sit on my shelf in my office. So,
I
among
love it.
too many other books that I have, but I have to have them, right? Like, you can't not have them.
There you go. That's right.
Okay, so do you have future books? Like, I know you said you've put out a lot, but is there anything like in the works, or are you just kind of focusing on other things right now?
I'm the kind of writer that I only write when I'm inspired. And at the same time, if I'm going to put something out there, I want it to be different
Yeah.
than what is already there.
Mhm.
So when I wrote Kids Deserve It, I didn't feel like there was something out there with that kind of messaging written in the kind of style that we wrote, where it was just really digestible, easy to do chapters. And then I was like, done. Like, I wrote my one book. I'm done. And
Yeah.
then I remember the next book that I dreamt up was I just talking to my staff one day at Webb Elementary. And I was like, God, you guys are freaking brilliant. And nobody even gets to see some of the stuff you're doing because you're not on social media. You're in a little town in Texas. And this advice that my mentor, Jimmy Casas, gave me just kept coming to my head. And he once told me, make sure that no matter how big of a microphone that you get, that you amplify the voices of others louder than you amplify your own.
Mhm.
And that has so resonated with me throughout my entire career. And I was like, well, then dang, I'm going to write a book with my staff. Like, I'm just going to write a book that takes all these wide variety of people who work at a school and let them share their stories. And so that's where Stories from Webb, because we were Webb Elementary, came from, because I felt like there wasn't a book out there like that, where it
Yeah.
was written in the same style as Kids Deserve It, but with little inserts from everybody, from the cafeteria manager to the assistant superintendent, just everybody who plays a role, getting to see. I would hope that other people could read that book and see that everybody's story matters.
Yeah.
Which then led to me saying, I'm done again, until I met a friend and we were talking about our love for literacy. And then that's where Sparks in the Dark came from. And then I was talking with another friend about student leadership and how there just really wasn't a great book out there, we felt like, there's so many great adult leadership books, but nothing for students. And so
Yeah.
that's when we're like, oh my gosh, When Kids Lead. And then from that was COVID hit. And I said, there's just so much darkness everywhere. So I reached out to three of my friends who are just lights in my own life. And I said, let's write a book of hope. Let's write a book that people could pick up no matter what season of life they find themselves in, where we are listed as the authors in the front, but nobody knows who wrote what inside the book. But
Yeah.
it's just like you can turn to any chapter and just get a dose of daily inspiration. And that's where In This Season came from. And then I met a friend who has a master's degree in leadership. And he was talking about all of his work. And I was like, I'm really passionate right now about just helping everybody develop the leader within, but not just at work, like also within their friendships, also within their families. And he was
Mhm.
like, let's write a book about that. And I said, I love it. And so
Yeah.
that's where that came from. And so each one of those were born out of a time of me feeling inspired by something and feeling the need to get it out of me in some way. And so right now I'm not working on any kind of book. I'm a very passion driven person. I never have a 5 or 10 year goal. I have never been that person. Bravo to those of you that can. For me, I'm like, every single thing that has happened in my life would have never been part of a 5 year plan, much
Yeah.
less a 10 year. So that's kind of like, I pursue what I'm passionate about in the moment, and I pursue it with all of me. Like, I'm all in. And so right now, I'm not passionate about writing a book. So I'm not just going to put one out just to put one out.
Yeah.
Right now, I'm passionate about other things that I'm doing, and I want to dive into those and invest in those and not just give myself partially to things. And so that's kind of why any part of my career that shifted over the years, whether it's writing, speaking, educator, whatever, it's all shifted because I felt my passions veering towards something new.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think I find that that is actually pretty common with people who are speakers, consultants, writers. It's you, you are number one, a risk taker, but you're going to just jump after something that that sparks your interest and
Yeah.
passion. Yeah.
And I'm not afraid to fail, I think is part of
Yeah.
it as well. Like, I find that terrifying, yet completely exciting at the same time. Like, if that makes any kind of sense. Like, I don't want people to think like, oh, he's not even scared. No, I'm absolutely terrified, filled with anxiety with every decision I make. But it like
Yeah.
fuels me at the same time. So it makes no sense. But
Yeah. Well, speaking of terrifying, difficult conversations is our topic tonight. And so our title for this episode is How Difficult Conversations Impact Culture. And difficult conversations can actually, I'm so excited about this episode. I think we could talk way too long about this. So I'm really going to have to watch it. But this is one of my favorite things to talk about and hear other people talk about as well, because it is so terrifying to not, well, okay, maybe I'm exaggerating there, but it can be terrifying for a lot of people, very uncomfortable for a lot of people. And I'm going to go ahead and say I'm of the opinion that we have grown up in a culture where we haven't learned to have difficult conversations. And so I'm really interested to hear your perspective tonight. So you have been in lots of different roles, but you've also been in a principal role, right? So
Yep.
I want to know how different approaches to tough conversations can actually impact a culture. And what are like some big mistakes that you feel like leaders make when they avoid those discussions?
Well, I have to say first and foremost that this topic is something that has become really something that I've really dove into in the last year or two, really trying to understand the nuances, the ins and outs, getting better at it. A, because I wasn't very good at it for a while. And B, one of the things that I'm drawn to right now is things that people treat us like we should know, but we've never been trained in them. So we don't really know, but nobody knows how to say, I don't know. And so for me, difficult conversations is one of those things. Like, people think like, well, you are working with people. You are a person. You've grown up in life. You should know how to have a difficult conversation right now. And I'm like, you know what? You're right. With my mom's personality, I knew how to have a difficult conversation with her. All these 30,000 other people I work with a variety of personalities and abilities, I don't always know how. And I don't want to say I don't know how because people assume you're supposed to. And so that's kind of where this work for me became important. But, when it comes to school culture, those difficult conversations are mandatory if you are going to have a good school culture. Because if you have worked on a campus for any amount of time, you know how quickly information spreads. And I have worked underneath a wide variety of administrators in my teaching career. I've had a screamer. I've had one who was amazing. I had one who I swore was possessed. I had one who I testified in her trial and she went to jail. Like, I've seen a wide variety of leadership. And I know how much that leadership can dictate the culture of a campus to a point. But people know when the leader can't have hard conversations.
Mm-hmm.
And that begins to seep into other things. Like I remember working for a leader who we all knew she could not have hard conversations because we could pinpoint the two staff who were never on time with never any consequences, who would walk in after we were having to cover their class for 30 minutes with their Starbucks and their McDonald's. And all we're doing is sitting there going, why can't you have this with them? Oh, you aren't able to? Fine. Then I'm going to start doing this because I know
Yeah.
you're not going to call me out on it.
Yeah.
And though we don't want to behave like that, I think it's kind of that natural thing that happens when people are like, I can only put up with not having a leader for so long who will make the tough calls. And the reality is, I'm sure that administrator at that time wasn't having those difficult conversations because they're not fun. They're
Yeah.
not comfortable. And there is the possibility for it to go very wrong. And I think too, especially, I look at other fields and I think, how are they able to do it so easily? It seems like. But in education, we struggle.
Mm-hmm.
And what I've come to realize is that, especially in elementary education, we struggle with that because we put our whole heart into the job. Now, that is not saying my middle school and high school friends don't put their whole heart into the job. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is, as elementary people, we are wiping noses. We are tying shoes. We are dealing with tears left and right. And sometimes that happens in middle and junior high and high school too. But we are such heart people that having those difficult conversations get emotional really fast. And I think that becomes uncomfortable. And we don't want to upset people. And I know for me, my personality is I don't want you to be mad at me.
Yeah.
And that meant for a while, I led very poorly because you can't lead from a mindset of how do I keep everyone happy? Because that wasn't my job. My job was never to keep everyone happy, which means I have to have those hard conversations, make mistakes, do it again, apologize when necessary, ask for help when I need it, like all those pieces.
Yeah. Man, that's so powerful. I think one thing that stands out to me as you're talking about this is number one, your authenticity and your vulnerability to be able to say, I've lived through the hard times of having a difficult time having the difficult conversations. And it is not comfortable. It is not easy. And too often it has not been practiced. And we don't even know where to begin or have the skills. I provide a reflective Leaders Institute as one of the things that I offer for schools. But the premise is we assume that because we're adults, we have the skills to be able to collaborate well and to lead well, when in reality, most people have been hired for these leadership positions because they were a stellar classroom teacher, a
Mhm.
stellar instructional coach, a stellar assistant principal. And that's great and dandy, but that doesn't inherently mean that they possess the skills that they need in order to lead people well, because you're working with very complex adults. And
Yes.
so I love that you're sharing about your own experience and going through that. I think we all have had it. It's how we learn and grow, but we have to make the choice to learn and grow from that. And we
And
have
if
to,
you've never had a bad, difficult conversation, then you clearly haven't been in education long enough
right.
because it only takes one parent out of control, one coworker who loses their mind. We're all going to have those conversations and we're all going to fail at them at some
Mhm.
point.
Yeah.
And I always tell administrators, I say, if you haven't had to have those hard conversations yet, that's okay. You just haven't hired a psycho yet because all of us let them slip through the cracks. And there's professional interviewers who sound amazing on the spot. And then a week into the job, we realize we're about to be on national news.
Yes.
And so it just, even when you are doing difficult conversations really well, it just takes one new personality, new experience to throw you completely off track. And so
Yeah.
for me, it's never been about perfection. It's about having some systems in place and learning from every opportunity to say, okay, that didn't go well. Here's what I can do differently next time.
Yes, absolutely. And I think too, to add on to that, considering like what is the skill or what is the tactic or what is the protocol that I want to intentionally practice. And I think it's completely okay to let your staff or let your colleagues know I am practicing this. And
Mm-hmm.
so you're going to see me fumble through it. I really would love your feedback as I practice XYZ, whatever it might be. But man, how great that would be for your culture to let people know I'm practicing these things to help me to have the crucial conversations, the difficult conversations, whatever kind of conversation it might be. But I think that also impacts culture too, because you're opening up doors for them to also be vulnerable and authentic with you.
Vulnerability only makes you a better leader. And I
Mm-hmm.
don't know why that is so difficult for so many of us. And at some point, I'm speaking to myself too, to understand. But time and time again, every single time I've seen huge growth in myself, or I've watched myself do things I didn't think, it was because I allowed myself to be vulnerable in front of somebody else.
Yeah.
Always.
Yeah, that's 100% accurate. I wonder too, you're kind of making me think about the ladder climbers versus the people who are becoming true reflective transformational leaders,
Mhm.
and again, I think too often we have ladder climbers, but we also, here's another thing. I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this. Um, I think our schools, our districts could do a much better job of having mentorships and leadership training for the people they put in those leadership positions. And I don't know that that happens enough. It's almost like you've made it, pinnacle, we're here, the end, your learning is over. But it has to go beyond that, especially as you climb the ladder, it just gets lonelier and lonelier.
That's true.
So I really want to know like what your thoughts are, what your take is on that.
You know, I think no matter what role you're in, you can view it as what you did at a different role. And here's what I mean by that. I don't think you can ever say, just ask if you need help. That goes against who we are as people, especially as you move for higher and higher up in positions. You find yourself asking for less and less help because you think people put me here because of my knowledge. I don't want to look like I don't have that knowledge base anymore. And at the same time, then a lot of other excuses start to begin. Well, I can't attend this training because that's a day away from work. I can't invest in this because we don't have the money, or they're not going to give me the day, or it's just going to make my to-do list longer. And I think we very quickly forget that if you don't invest in you, you aren't going to get better for others. You
Mm-hmm.
will have to take those days. You will have to invest your own money sometimes. You will have to make those sacrifices if you truly are looking at getting better. And you cannot wait for your organization to put those things into place.
Mm.
Not every organization is capable of doing that. And at the same time, their ideas are still limited to what has been done before.
Yeah.
And so I think many districts may offer some mentorship or some form of principals meet once a month and we go through things or things like that. Great. Take advantage of those learning opportunities, but it should never stop there. I
Mm-hmm.
always told my teachers there's a lot of brilliance on this campus, and we want to learn from each other when we can. But this campus is not all that there is, and we do not have all the answers. So when you find that PD that fills a hole, that makes a weakness stronger, like those kind of things, let me know. When
Mm-hmm.
you can come to me and say, this is a big area for me, this training addresses that, I need to attend it, done. We will make it happen because
Yeah.
my job is to make you better.
Yeah.
And your supervisor should have that same mindset of their biggest job is to make you the best version of you. Because when you are performing at your best, everything else rises up too.
Yeah. Okay. So then let's talk about how difficult conversations can come into play there. If you are, I'm totally going off script, by the way, everybody. I have questions for all of these episodes, and it's just like, what do questions exist? No. Um, okay. But I want to know if we are helping people become a better version of themselves. How do you feel like difficult conversations come into play there? And what can be some approaches we take to having the difficult conversation?
I think one of the things is we forget that difficult conversations need to be about honesty. And I know that we have misdefined that word a lot in the last couple of years. But honesty does not mean rude. So I want to start there. I always tell people in difficult conversations, your first job is to be honest, but with love. And if you are not the kind of person that can find compassion for the person across the table, you are not the person to be having that difficult conversation with them, because you should be able to find the gold within each person that you work with. And though it may take you a while to find that gold in them, depending on your relationship with them, if you can't see a redeemable quality in them, then you're not the person for that conversation, because they're not going to listen and you're not going to convey it the way that you're meaning to. And so I think a lot about that first and foremost. But then I know that when I am having a difficult conversation with someone else, I'm always thinking about this is to make them better. And one of the best advices I was given by my assistant superintendent was, Todd, when you have a difficult conversation with a staff member, there's one phrase that should never come out of your mouth. And I said, what is that? And she said, that made me feel. She said, because your feelings don't matter. You are there to make them better. It is all about them. And so in that conversation with your staff that you're working with, never should you say, well, that made me feel, or it doesn't matter. Your feelings don't matter. And that's hard for us to comprehend a little bit, because we're in this heart work, because we have all of these feelings involved. And I'm such an emotional person. But when I was able to take myself out and realize this conversation is not about me at all, like I'm having this with them. Now, and I want to be clear, I'm being very specific about the type of difficult conversation I'm explaining right now. I am not telling you every conversation you have needs to have no emotion in it. Like I know sometimes people hear one thing, and I want to try to be clear there. But I think that those two things right there were great advice for me. Be honest with the love, and make sure that your emotions are not a part of that. Now, if I'm coming to a difficult conversation and I'm having someone talk to me, and I'm having to understand what they're saying, now there may be some emotion that comes out there, but that's a totally different experience. And so I think it's all about listening as well. As much, no matter what side of the table you find yourself on, that is not a skill any of us are born with. Work with a toddler, you'll see none of us are born with it. And it has to be practiced, and practiced for the rest of your life.
Right.
And listening has been a practice that I've had to really put a lot of effort into, because when I thought I was listening, I learned very quickly I wasn't. And so I think those three things are some of the three things that I just continually bring to my mind when I'm thinking about how to have one of these conversations successfully. There's a lot of all other nuances and things in there that are necessary as well. But I think for me, those are the three biggest.
Yeah. And I want to revisit listening again, because I think so often we listen to respond versus listening to understand. Jim Knight talks a lot about like that dialogue and really listening to understand instead of listening to respond. And I think when we're listening to respond, we are just preparing for our response versus having that empathy and really trying to understand another perspective that could be very different from ours, but also very valid too. And then the emotion piece too. I mean, our emotions are valid also. Like everyone is going to come to the table with certain emotions, and those emotions we cannot control. Like we cannot control other people's emotions. Sometimes we can't really control our own emotions.
Right.
And I think recognizing that ahead of time is so incredibly important. But we don't always grasp what we're feeling, why we're feeling the way that we're feeling. And we also don't consider too, what is it that the person that I'm coming into this conversation, what are they going to be feeling? Like, what are some possibilities? And how can I prepare myself for that before I go into this conversation? And I finally want to say, we absolutely can pause ourselves from going into a difficult conversation if we're not quite ready for it, or if the other person is not quite ready for it. And I think those situations have to be considered heavily because it can impact your culture, Because if you're going into a difficult conversation and it's just not the right time, man, you're setting yourself up and the your partner up for failure. And that's going to impact not only the two of you, but when you step away from that conversation and you're going into your other groups, you're going to be talking about that conversation and the impact that it had on you.
Well, and like you said, I think there's so many nuances to this, which is why there's not a one size fits all solution, which is why we haven't perfected it yet. Because, like you said, I mean, somebody could get a flat tire this morning or get a bad phone call from a doctor with a test they took, and that changes completely who they are, how they're addressing that. And so that's when you, like you said, you might need to step back and go, now's not a good time. Like, let's reschedule this for another time. We're not at our best capacity. And something else I've recently learned about is just the concept of emotional flooding, and how in some of those conversations that we're having, the person feels an emotion, and this is a natural human response, and they either will feel anger or anxiety or frustration or something, and that emotion is so strong that it floods their entire system.
Mm.
And what happens when you've become emotionally flooded is that you are unable to take in new information. And so, though you may be sitting there nodding, agreeing, or disagreeing, or whatever, you can leave that meeting and truly remember none of it and think, oh my God, how can I not remember what they said? Like, I was there. Or you may go back and go, how can that person not remember? They said they understood. They repeated it back to me. Well, guess what? They were also emotionally flooded. So, in that moment, they may think they're taking it all in, but their body literally is not able to, because they have been overcome with that emotion. And that
Yeah.
has really helped me in kind of, and one of the reasons why, one of the biggest tips I give supervisors when they are having a difficult conversation with a staff member is always follow up in writing as soon as they leave the room. Because though you may have left that room on the same page, if it ain't put in writing, nobody's going to remember it in 3 or 4 days, or the little things that were agreed upon. And so I always put it in writing. And I'm just like, thank you so much for meeting with me. I'm glad we got to talk about A, B, C, D. I'm glad we set these things in place. I'm going to get this resource for you by this date. Like, all of that. It's pretty much like the meeting scripted. And
Yeah.
so that they can have that, and I can have it too, in case I became emotionally flooded by the person
Yeah.
across the table.
Yeah. I mean, I'm thinking about all kinds of situations where I was like, that's why I didn't remember anything they said.
Yep.
I'm thinking about my
Yep.
arguments with my husband. Like, oh, I was emotionally flooded. I love this idea. And I think it's so important for supervisors to understand, but it's really important for us just as human beings to understand too. Like,
Yeah.
recognizing when that's happening to you so that you can navigate
Yeah.
where to go in the conversation. Yeah, that's fantastic. Okay, so let's talk about, I just want to touch on this a little bit because I know that it happens. Let's say you're in a difficult conversation and it is going south really, really quickly. What are your tips for that?
So I have been in several like that. And there's sometimes, before going into the meeting, that it doesn't have a high likelihood of success, or there are some habits that the person has that you're prepared for, but sometimes you're caught totally off guard. And so I think that this answer is two different directions of conversation. So for me, the first is when I know somebody that I'm going to have a difficult conversation with is volatile to begin with, I do not meet with the door closed, because if that person's going to end up screaming at me, I need the rest of my office team to know I'm not screaming back. Like, I want them to hear me at my normal voice while this person is berating me, or however it is, so that it's not a he said, she said down the road. And there have been times where I have been in a difficult conversation with someone that I called the meeting for, and I said, you know what? We're not getting anywhere right now. So let's readdress this when we've all had time to just get away from this conversation.
Yeah.
And no matter what they said, that's the final word. Like,
Mhm.
you can continue all you want, but I'm going to readdress this later.
Yeah.
Like, because sometimes the person across the table may say, oh, no, we're not. We're going to finish this right now. And I've gotten up and said, you are welcome to stay here as long as you need. I'm going to go ahead and remove myself from the situation. Like, keeping that calm is like superhero, Marvel, DC kind of superpowers to do. But for me, I know that it's necessary
Yeah.
because you cannot win in those moments. And
Mhm.
nobody comes out feeling any better or on the same page. Like, oh, well, you screamed at me and I screamed back at you, and now we agree. No, it just
Right.
doesn't work that way. And
Yeah.
whether it's a difficult conversation with a parent that came in, with a colleague, with you cannot be afraid to say, this is not getting anywhere right now. Let's try this again at another time.
Mhm.
Because that's just, you have to advocate for yourself.
Yep.
And if you don't feel safe, or if you feel like it is getting nowhere, end it. Be done. You don't have to do it. Like, you don't have to say, well, since you won't stop screaming, I'm no, like that's belittling someone. We know that never works on anyone. It's just like when somebody says, I'm sorry you feel that way. Oh my God, I want to slap somebody so much in those moments. I'm like, that is not an apology. Just because you use the words I'm sorry followed by what they no, like no,
You're
all
right.
that does is make me like so angry.
Uh-huh.
And so I think just learning to walk away and knowing that that shows great leadership to know when to walk away as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Every bit of the words that you're saying, I'm like, you have to really have had time to develop self-awareness,
Mhm.
social awareness, and self-management. Like, you have to hone those skills if you are going to be able to do these kinds of things well. Um, and not let yourself get caught up in it negatively.
Well, and I want to reiterate that I'm not an expert at this, but I think that my knowledge base expanded, and I got much better at this when I started therapy.
Mm,
And my personal opinion is if you work in the medical field or in the education field, therapy shouldn't be an option.
yep.
I wish I was seeing a therapist when I was an administrator. I would have been so much better than
Mhm.
I was.
Yep.
But I couldn't see it in the moment. I thought I could read some books. I thought I could go to some training, and that would fill in the gaps.
Yep.
What I didn't realize was most of the issue was myself. And
Mhm.
most of my issues were so hidden and deeply seated that I didn't even know they were issues until a professional third party was able to sit down with me and go, why do you say it like that? Or explain where that emotion comes from. Or like emotional flooding, I learned from being in therapy. And I will never forget attending a professional development. And that's the whole reason I went to therapy was he said, you know what? We talk so much about our physical health. We are
Mhm.
trained as Americans that you should be seeing a dentist twice a year. Not everybody does, but you're told that you should be seeing a dentist twice a year. You should be seeing your doctor at least once a year. If you have young children, you know you take them to the 1 week appointment, the 1 month appointment, the 6 month appointment. And he said, and why do you see the dentist twice a year? Why do you see the doctor once a year or even more if you have young children? For checkups. It's
Yeah.
existing so that you can find an issue before it becomes a bigger issue. And he
Mhm.
said, so why, when it comes to mental health, is our primary viewpoint that if you are seeing as somebody for mental health, then there already is a major issue. He
Mhm.
said, I believe that at minimum, you should have two appointments with a therapist a year, just like a dentist, just 2 check-ins a year. And
Yeah.
I left that training, and I'm a questioner, and I don't really believe in things until I've done it myself. And so I left and I went, you know what? I love that, but I gotta do some of my own research. And my therapist now, he will tell you, he always says, Todd, you've come so far. You actually will try an idea now instead of just being like, I don't believe that. He's like, now you'll like listen to things and do them because I left and I went to my wife and I said, okay, Liz, I said, everything, I'm gonna go see a therapist. And she was like, oh my God, what's wrong? And I was like, nothing is wrong. I know that's how we were all raised. But no, I said, you know what? Actually, everything in life right now is fantastic. Now is the time I want to see a therapist.
Mm,
Because if they can't help me get any better at anything when things are good, what's the point of seeing one when things aren't good? And so
yeah.
I found a therapist a few towns over because I did not want to see my therapist at the grocery store. And I found one that had some faith elements built in because I wanted that to be part of the journey as well. Um, and that was about 3 or 4 years ago. And I have seen him now every week for the last 3 or 4 years. And
Yeah.
it's been life changing just with the way that I communicate with my friends and family, my spouse, my children, my coworkers, just the way I view myself, the way I dove into little things that I do or say or think or believe that I'd never had questioned before. And I feel like it has made me such a better individual. I'm nowhere near where I want to be,
Yeah.
but I look at it and go, when I look at my own journey with therapy, all I can think is, God, I would have been so much better as a principal had I been in this. I would have
Yep.
been so much better as an educator, as a classroom teacher, had I been in therapy then,
Mhm.
because I would have had a professional helping me walk through stuff with an unbiased viewpoint who wasn't in my everyday life. And it is just, and it's why I talk about it in every kind of training that I do, because I have no shame saying I see a therapist once a week.
Yep.
Because you can judge me all you want. I'm working on me. I ain't working on you. I'm working on me and hoping that by me working on me, I can become better for you too.
Yeah.
And so it's just, and my wife will attest to that as well, just that she's seen changes. And so, like I said, there's still stuff that I'm working on, but it's brought so much to my viewpoint that I didn't even realize I was believing about myself or believing about others until
Hmm.
I was in an environment and just talking about it and being questioned over those kind
Yeah.
of things.
Yeah. Man, I love that so much. I mean, guys, really and truly, I know our conversation was about how to have difficult conversations, but if you gain nothing else from this episode, please take away that that is absolutely an option for everyone. And I'm a firm believer in it as well. And I'm going to say if you're not comfortable doing that, at a minimum, get a coach,
Mm-hmm.
get a mentor. and
Yep.
and I can speak for to that myself. Like, I hired a speaking coach about a year ago, and because she is a and I had friends saying, like, why do you need a speaking coach? Like, you're already great at speaking. And I said, but that's not, like, there are some things I want to uncover mentally that are going on. And, like, I don't want to, like, I told a doctor one time, I get, everybody I think gets nervous getting up on stage. It's just a part of your body and what happens, a physical reaction. And his first response was, well, we can get you some medicine for that. And I was like, no, I'm not about that. I want to get down to the root of, like, what's
Yeah.
causing this, what's going on, and how can I maintain it and address it in the moment. And so that's kind of why I went after a speaking coach. And let me tell you what, it was phenomenal. Like,
Mm-hmm.
uncovering some deep rooted thoughts, like you were talking
Mm-hmm.
about, that I didn't even realize I had until I said it all out loud. And so I think it just does something for you. And like you said, it makes you so much more available to the people that you
Mm-hmm.
are leading. And I say that, like, in generally, the people that you're leading in all areas of life, because everyone leads someone
Yeah.
every day.
Yeah. And and something that you said there reminded me. I remember talking to my primary care physician about setting up an appointment with us with a therapist and what his thoughts were. And he said, I'm so glad you asked. He said, because I have countless people who come into my office and want medicine to fix the problem. And he said, you can look at any amount of research. And he said, what typically happens is it's 20% medication to fix an issue, 20% physical activity to fix an issue, and then the whole rest of the percentage is mental health supports. He said,
Mhm.
and that's the piece people don't want to do, which is why their medicine keeps getting increased or why
Yep.
this or that happens. He said, it's all, he said, some people need medicine and need the physical activity and need the therapy. He said, but it's not just one piece that fixes things for everyone. You have to find what works for you and make it do that. So I love that you shared that as well.
Yeah, that's awesome. Okay, man, this has been such a good conversation. We're going to come to a close. If you could think of one thing you want our audience to walk away with based on our conversation tonight, what would that be? What would be a takeaway?
I think for me, the biggest thing to remember is you are never at the finish line. I think that, especially in education, we have so many benchmark moments and so many where you get these results or you get this or that. And so I think sometimes we view our personal growth as we should be reaching this milestone as well. And though I feel like you are always growing, you will never be the best version of yourself. Your only goal is to be better than you were yesterday. And the biggest thing that I hope you hear in becoming that better person is knowing when to apologize, knowing when to own your mistakes, and knowing when to be vulnerable enough to ask for help. Those components are necessary in becoming the best version of yourself for that day. Because just when you're happy with who you are as an individual, life throws a curveball and everything gets shifted. So I think, just like I said, that you hear the reality that none of us feel like we have it all together. Though we can pretend, thanks to social media, it's never the case. And so don't feel like you're not where someone else is, so you're not doing it right. Everybody's on a different path. Your biggest job should be getting better every day.
Yep. I love it. Thank you so much, Todd. This has been a wonderful conversation. I've loved it so much. And you brought so many gold nuggets to our audience. And I know that they will be grateful for it. So where can people find you when they hop off of this live or off of this podcast episode?
Yeah, so the easiest way is just to go to my website, and that's toddnesloney.com. If you don't know how to spell it, just Google how you think Todd Nesloney is spelled. It'll come up. Don't worry, everybody misspells it. But that's got my blog, my resources, all my social media, any other way you want to contact or check out resources I provide. So toddnesloney.com is the place to be.
Okay, awesome. Well, thank you so much. This has been awesome.
Thank you.
All right, bye, everybody. Hey there, thanks for joining this episode. I would love for you to do me 3 solid favors before you head out. Number 1, subscribe to this show. I've got a lot of great guests and content coming up, and I don't want you to miss any of it. Number 2, share this show. Share it with your like-minded colleagues and friends and those leaders who are eager to build cohesive, vision-driven teams. And finally, connect with me on all the social media platforms. You can find me at Catch Up with Casey on Instagram, YouTube, and LinkedIn. Until next time, go off and create teams that leave people feeling inspired, empowered, and eager for more each day.